We've all seen Hollywood movies that show different versions of what the future might look like. Some of them show a future with flying cars, others show a future where everyone owns a robot. And then of course, there are movies that show a future where those robots try to take over the world. But for the most part, these movies tend to focus on what the future might look like in terms of technology. But how about us, humans? What might the future look like in terms of global human population? Today, there are 7.9 billion people in the world. But how might that have changed by the year 2100? It may sound crazy at first, but perhaps the best starting point of answering the question of how global population will have changed in the future is to tell you that there will be more people in Nigeria than in China by 2100. Now, let that sink in for a bit. Today, Nigeria has a population of about 200 million people, while China, of course, has over a billion. Yet, about 80 years from now, there will be such a drastic change in global population that Nigeria will become the second most populous country in the world, behind only India, while China will rank third due to population decline. In 2020, a group of health researchers collaborated on a pretty important research project to forecast global population for 195 countries. This study was published in Lancet, which, for those who don't know, is an independent international medical journal. This research was based on multiple key factors, like mortality, which accounts for how often people die, and fertility, which accounts for how often people are born. And of course, migration, which accounts for how people move from one country to another. And this was important because to be able to look forward into the future and try to determine what global population might look like, you have to take multiple factors into account. But the truth is, no matter how much you try, human history has already shown that there's simply too much that can happen in a very short amount of time that you might not be able to take into account. Now, take the past few years, for example. If you were working on global population forecast in 2020, it would have been unlikely that a pandemic that killed 6 million people would have been taken into account. But that's exactly what happened with COVID. So what do you do when there's no surefire way to try to predict global population growth? Well, you do the next best thing, which is to take as many multiple factors into account to try, or rather attempt to arrive at an answer. Well, the headline is, as of 2017, there were 7.6 billion people in the world. But by 2100, there will be 8.8 billion people in the world. Now, here's the interesting part. Between 2017 and 2100, the peak size of global population will happen in 2064, when we have 9.7 billion people in the world, according to this research. So if you take a look at those three numbers, what do you see? The obvious thing is that global population size in 2100 will be 1.2 billion, larger than it was in 2017. But the crazy part is, between now and 2064, population size will actually grow by a lot and then start to decline. And that's pretty much the gist of this study. In nearly every continent, population size by 2100 will be a lot smaller than it is today. So let's go back to that China example from earlier. The forecast is that the population of China will decline by as much as 48%, which is nearly half of the entire country. But crazy as that sounds, the decline will actually be worse in some other countries. So listen closely. Japan, Thailand, Spain, as well as 20 other countries, all these countries will have population declines of 50% or more between 2017 and 2100. And so to put it simply, the size of the population in these countries by 2100 will be less than half of what it was in 2017. Now, think about that for a minute. It'd be like Thanos snapped his fingers, and instead of half of the country instantly disappearing, it happened over the course of 80 years. The easiest way to explain this is that population decline happens when the rate at which humans die is higher than the rate at which humans are born. And that's exactly what will happen in a lot of countries over the next 80 years. Death rates will either be at par or higher than birth rates. The question that comes out of this is, at what rate do new humans need to be born to ensure that the population is being replaced and not declining? And the answer to that is something called total fertility rate of 2.1 births per woman. If on average, women have 2.1 children, then total population will be replaced. Now, of course, this doesn't mean every woman must have 2 kids. Some women will have more than 2 kids, other women will have less than 2 kids, and of course, some will choose not to have kids at all. But as long as the average birth rate translates to 2.1 births per woman, then the total fertility rate needed or necessary for population replacement will have been met. So take that total fertility rate and compare to what will happen in a lot of countries in this century. Remember, the study published in the Lancet forecasted population for 195 countries. By 2050, 151 of these countries will have total fertility rates lower than 2.1 births per woman. And by 2100, the number of countries with total fertility rates lower than 2.1 births per woman will be 183. The translation is that only 12 countries will have total fertility rates needed to replace their populations by 2100. Now, even though this study published in the Lancet was looking far ahead into the future, we can already see some signs of population decline today, like in Japan, where almost 500,000 more people died than were born in 2018. But remember, despite these declining populations in most countries, there will still be 1.2 billion more people in the world by 2100 compared to 2017. And the answer is Africa. While populations will decline across most parts of the country between 2017 and 2100, the population in Africa will actually triple, which explains why Nigeria will surpass China in population size and then become the second largest country in the world. Here's one way to understand how the population in Africa will grow. As of 2017, there were only 2 African countries with populations of over 100 million people. That's Nigeria and Ethiopia. But by 2100, there will be 9 countries with populations over 100 million people. Now, among these 9, 2 countries are particularly fascinating and they caught my eye. And that's Chad and Niger, who are literally next door neighbors. Both countries will see their population grow by more than 700% between 2017 and 2100. To understand why Africa's population will grow so quickly, we have to go back to the total fertility rates, right? As of 2017, the fertility rate in Niger was 7 births per woman, while in Chad, it was 6.7 births per woman, far higher than the total fertility rate of 2.1 births per woman needed for population replacement. In fact, in total, only 7 African countries had fertility rates lower than the global average. Everywhere else, it was higher. When you match these high fertility rates to a currently pretty young population, what you get is a lot of babies. But the big question is if African countries can even handle the incoming rate of population growth, or explosion if you like. Chad and Niger, for example, are 2 of the world's poorest countries. The harsh truth is, a lot of countries will need to develop pretty quickly to cater to their growing populations. But maybe they won't have to, at least not for all of their citizens. And that's because one likely consequence of population decline in other parts of the world is that these countries will likely begin to open up to migrants, just so they can maintain or grow a sizable population of working age. This is even more likely to happen when you consider the fact that 25% of global population by 2100 will be older than 65. And you know what? It's already starting to happen. And for the evidence, we go back to Japan, which is a great example because Japan has always been known for a pretty tough immigration policy throughout its history. But in a major change recently as it continues to deal with population decline, Japan is actually starting to become more immigration friendly and letting more foreign workers in, and not just letting them in, but also allowing them to stay in the country indefinitely. And so back to the initial question, what will the world look like in 2100? We often think that the future will always be brighter, bigger, and better. But more than anything else, these population forecasts show that for a lot of countries, the world will actually be a lot smaller than it is today. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this or learned something new, then subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you're first to know when I drop a new video every week. And also, of course, send this video to anyone you know who often wonders about the future.